People will get more from the idea he represented than from the jelly bean he actually was.
Okay. All right. Who or what is the jelly bean?
Welcome to No Occasion to Shout. We are back, and I have some more videos to show Robin. There's a lot of interesting media out in the world right now.
Okay, but I think, Austin, since we are coming back after, I think, years, you should probably tell the viewers what it is we're doing on this channel.
That's true. If you don't remember, I show Robin, who, by the way, his name is credentials, author, political speech writer, PhD.
No, I'm
in
not.
Philosophy.
I haven't got the
almost
PhD. No.
2 master's degrees, which is basically the equivalent of
That's kind of you to say.
one of which is in physics and the other in the philosophy of science. And I show him videos basically of sciencey stuff or political stuff in cartoons, and he reacts to them and tells us whether or not it depends on the episode. Sometimes we could be going for, is this politically accurate? Is this accurate in terms of physics? Or sometimes we just will show him very strange videos just to get his genuine reaction.
What is my purpose?
Pass the butter. Thank you.
Yeah, and I haven't seen any of these, I should say, before you showed them to me in the show, Austin. And I never have any clue what you're going to show me. So, yeah, let's see if we can get the show back on the road.
We're going to start you out slow. We don't need our explanation on why the physics aren't correct in the episode. We're just going to have a more chill episode for our first time back, and while we're getting the audio quality and the video quality higher, which it will, I'm guessing, every single episode we're going to improve pretty drastically.
Okay, we better.
Sir, I think you're gonna want to see this. We found it inside a lockbox, inside King Jellybean's closet. We have to tell the people.
Wait. Destroy it. Our people will get more from the idea he represented than from the jelly bean he actually was.
Okay. All right. Who or what is the jelly bean?
I did neglect to show you some of the beginning parts. Basically, the jelly bean is a child predator, and the jelly bean was a king, much like maybe George Washington type of figure for this town, and he died, and they commemorated a statue for him, and they had this funeral arrangement, and everyone was very commemorative of the Jelly Bean King. And then, as you saw in that scene, they found evidence of the child
Abuse.
And the jelly bean threw up a little bit in his mouth, and he said, should we alert the people? I mean, you saw it. And then,
Yeah.
no, the people will get more from the representation of what the jelly bean was than the jelly bean he actually was.
Yeah. Huh.
Pretty deep for a cartoon, huh?
Well, I think the depth is what all of the clips that you have shown me in our previous incarnation, and no doubt will show me in this one, have in common. And that's why you choose them, right? It's because you made good choices that we can have a decent show here. So okay, I mean, that's kind of completely out of the blue, and it's a very short clip. It basically carries one idea. But let me tell you what first came to mind. Have you heard of Jimmy Savile?
Spell the last name.
Saville. You haven't heard of him. Everybody in Britain knows who he is. He is notorious, and I don't know if it was Netflix or one of the the big streaming companies did a 2-part documentary on him. He was the greatest, if I can use that word, child predator in modern times. And he was, in his age, in the 70s especially, 60s and 70s into the 80s, actually even into the 90s, one of the biggest figures on British TV. He was well loved. He was a huge philanthropist. He got a knighthood, and Prince Charles wrote to him for advice. He was the most, like, if he wasn't a king, although he was kind of a king of children's hearts, he did all this, this children's broadcasting. I remember him from when I was a kid, and it turned out after his death that he was a serial child abuser of the worst kind. And a lot of the work that he was doing, for example, to build hospitals, and he did great work, right, taken on its face, but it was as much to do good, it was, let's say, less to do good perhaps than it was to give him access to children to abuse. And it appears that the number of children that he abused ran into the many hundreds. And it was extraordinary the extent to which he did all of this in plain sight, actually, looking back. I mean, there was a huge inquiry at the BBC. He worked for the BBC. He was one of their biggest celebrities over, as I say, many decades. When it all came out a few years back, the BBC was in a crisis over it, right? Because it was accused of covering up, of helping enable this man. Would the world be a better place if that King of Hearts, if his crimes, his life, not have been made public in full? I should say that I have, one might call it a faith commitment, but not a blind faith commitment, to an idea promulgated actually by a gentleman that I know you and I both respect, Austin, Jordan Peterson, that, the power of the Logos, the faith in the idea that the telling of truth brings the best possible outcomes in a world of uncertainty and lack of knowledge, right? It is a faith position to which I adhere. When one starts to make choices about what information to withhold, one does it because of one's, I guess, own prejudices or even one's own morality, there are usually negative consequences. Or let's put it this way. It never turns out as purely good as one's intentions might, have caused you to withhold or distort. I mean, the truth does set you free, right? In the case of Jimmy Savile, we learned, the British people, I learned what is possible, right? For a serial pedophile and abuser to be as well connected as probably any man on the planet. I mean, if you just look at the people that he spent time with, from royalty to the top of all kinds of establishment institutions, all kinds of domains, it tells you what can be done with a singularity of purpose. In his case, a singularity of purpose largely for evil. But of course, we've also seen what can be done with a singularity of purpose for good. We also see how completely people, indeed entire cultures of people, will believe what they want to believe, will not see what it would pain them to see. The power not only of cognitive dissonance, or indeed the need to avoid cognitive dissonance, but the need not to even put oneself in a position where one might experience it, right? I mean, there's so much that can be said about the Jimmy Savile phenomenon. It shook a nation. It really shook a nation, hence the documentary on whatever it was, to say Netflix or whatever it was. So here we are. That's how I can relate to what's going on in this cartoon. A great and famous man, should the truth be told about him? Well, one could see the discomfort that could be caused by so doing, but such important truths that are conveyed by the telling of the honest story. I think, per Jordan Peterson, can only be good in the long run. I actually think, and this might be a whole other show to discuss, that, and this is going to be a radical and crazy claim that I'm not going to expect anybody to believe when I say it without justification. But I've been thinking about this quite a bit recently, and I think a case can actually be made that all personal morality reduces to a commitment to truth, to the telling of the truth, which also means to not acting in such a way that one would lie about. And so I come from quite a very strong, I guess, pro-truth bias. And that's what I feel when I see that little clip you played me.
Okay, so here's what I'll say in response, because a lot of thoughts popped up. You might have saw me scrambling around for a paper. I had to write some of them down so I wouldn't forget. Something you said about the cognitive dissonance of people refusing to believe in something reminded me of, and it's going to pain me if you, depending on how you answer this, Robin, but have you ever seen Star Wars?
I have.
Okay.
You slightly surprised?
If you had not seen Star Wars,
I'm slightly surprised.
There's a scene in episode 4, the very first one that George Lucas, New Hope, which I actually just watched a few days ago. And I was thinking, this is so much different than I remember when I watched this when I was 9. It was a very different movie. But Ben Kenobi is talking to Luke. You're going to see, I can see your face. You're very confused. You're going to see how this connects.
I just don't remember any of this. So I'm listening intently so that, in the hope that you give me all the details that I'm going to need to be able to respond intelligently.
Okay. Ben Kenobi, who is in hiding, is Obi-Wan Kenobi. Which, by the way, new Disney Plus series, Obi-Wan Kenobi, very, very good. He's talking to Luke about his father, who is, of course, Darth Vader, or Anakin. And Luke asks him, what happened to my father? And he responds, he was killed by a Sith Lord named Darth Vader, which is sort of the truth. Is that the truth? Like, he's compartmentalizing the evil part of someone versus the good part of someone. It's a compartmentalization, which when I watched, I felt he almost delusionally believed, or at least attempted to delusionally believe as well as he possibly could, that his best friend, Anakin, was killed by Darth Vader. Compartmentalized into two people.
Okay.
That was kind of my first thought as you were talking about cognitive dissonance, because I'm not sure that is a bad answer to give Luke. If he's judging himself if we're judging him from a moral standpoint of view, that kind of seems like a very good answer to give.
The idea being that he was trying to protect Luke from the literal truth? What was his motivation for giving that answer and just laying it out in a simple way?
What would you have done if you were in Obi-Wan's position?
My commitment would be to not saying something that would be to not telling a lie. My primary commitment would be to not telling the lie.
Okay.
If I were to say something that I honestly could regard as true within a certain kind of framing, right? With certain unusual meanings, let's say, of words that I was deploying, that would be morally acceptable to me. I could at a stretch maybe allow myself to do it, only if I was at the same time prepared to tell the complete truth in answer to any questions that might come my way. So in other words, if I was going to, let's say, perform that deception, right, but in some way that I could justify, I could regard it only as acceptable. I could do it only if I know in doing it, I'm actually prepared to lay out the literal truth in response to any questions I would get. And I think that actually we must always act that way. I think a commitment to acting in that way, acting in a way about which you would always tell the truth, is how one keeps oneself moral, how one ensures that one does not ignore the output of one's conscience. Most lies are told to avoid the discomfort, it seems to me, of facing the fact that one has done what one knows to be wrong. When I say discomfort, it could be discomfort or other consequences. In other words, lies demonstrate wrong. The telling of lies tends to demonstrate a wrongdoing, tends to be caused by a wrongdoing in a loose sense. So yeah, maybe a good answer, but I have certain black and white lines, I guess, if I can say that, or you know, black lines on a white background when it comes to lying. I mean, it's the one thing that I think is maybe the absolute commitment. It's not the same as an absolute commitment to always telling the truth, because there are lots of reasons why we can, and in some cases should, withhold truth. But to tell a direct lie, I think always is wrong.
Okay, so in the case of Obi-Wan, I feel like his end goal was to tell the truth, but to frame it in a way that Luke would be able to slowly come to terms in understanding how such a thing could happen.
Okay.
But of course, that goes down to intent, which I think is ultimately what you would need to know in order to know.
Yes, and we need to be clear that if we're talking about lying, we are talking in part about intent, right? To lie is not to convey a falsehood. We could unwittingly do that. To lie is to convey a falsehood knowingly, right?
Yes.
So yeah, that's worth making clear. So I should say, of course, by this standard, to go back to the cartoon that the Rick and Morty clip you showed me, I could, in the absence of other information in other contexts, I would look at that and say, I won't judge the withholding of the information to be wrong unless the jelly bean that withheld it intends to lie to defend his deception. If he is willing to let his deception itself be known by telling the truth, then I think actually probably the morality of the decision, all things being equal, could turn on that.
I would agree with that. And so what came to mind for me as an American was a few things. The founding fathers, Robert E. Lee, Michael Jackson. I kind of viewed it a little bit more broad, not specifically child molestation, but information being withheld. Columbus, for example, information being withheld in general, because history would be very bleak if everyone knew the truths about people of the past, especially as morality tends to the standards of morality seems to increase, at least in some variables as time goes on.
Why do you say bleak? I mean, it's interesting. I was having a conversation recently about how nearly all arguable heroes in history are corrupted in some way. It's often a great leader who, lied to his wife and had affairs. That's a very common one, right? There are very few. For example. There are very few. Say again?
Martin Luther King, for example. Martin Luther King Jr., I believe.
Absolutely. I mean, what a great example. So, there are a few pure heroes. There are probably quite a few quite pure men and women. There are probably quite a few heroes, but there are very few that are both of those things. And we could argue about the definition of hero. Again, I'm using it loosely. So
I don't
But-
necessarily find it bleak, but
yeah, I mean, there's a lot of moralizing. I feel like we live in a moralizing time, and obviously you say, well, relative to what? Well, relative to the 80s when I was a teenager. Like, you know, there's a lot more moralizing that teenagers seem to engage in today, and one might even say are the victims of today, than ever I saw or experienced when I was a teenager. And I know this because I'm the academic dean of the John Locke Institute, and I interview many hundreds of 16 and 17-year-olds each year for a place at a summer school in Oxford. And I encounter this, and my heart kind of aches for a lot of them, because they live in such as I say, a political and moralizing kind of world, you know, social media and all of that, and we can talk about that maybe another time. And so I think only because that's true, might it be hard for those folks to look back into history and be disappointed and see bleakness, because they're using inappropriate standards to judge something of which they know essentially nothing, another time, another place, another culture. Yeah, I mean, I don't feel the need to do that. I don't think it even makes sense. I don't even think it's coherent to judge somebody who simply does not have access to the ideas, the facts, whatever that we do now. I mean, again, we could talk a lot more about that. So I look back and I'm interested. I'm not upset. I'm not disappointed. I don't feel bleakness. I mean, actually, if anything, I feel gratitude, because all of those people got us here, you know, to sit here so that we can moralize about them. You know, irony of ironies.
Louis C.K., the comedian, has a joke, and I'm not sure if I'm remembering this correctly, but my butchered version of the joke applies in this instance. He's talking about Hitler in comparison to someone else. I believe it is like a single murderer, or it might even be someone who hasn't committed any murders but did something bad. And he says that the way we look at people relative to Hitler makes them look a lot less bad. So he would say, like, Hitler, for example, killed many Jews. And he goes on to say and admit an excessive amount, a crude excessive amount of Jews. Whereas, on the other hand, insert X name here, very few Jews in comparison. How do we separate the line when we're talking about Martin Luther King Jr. or Michael Jackson? How do we differentiate between Martin Luther King Jr. versus Mussolini versus Robert E. Lee versus any celebrity to which we hold to a ridiculous standard? And doesn't it kind of seem like people's perception of it is kind of net good minus net bad? And isn't that a very bad mathematical formula to look at morality?
Well, yeah, I don't think it. I mean, I think maybe. I don't know. I just have a problem with the whole idea of I'm going to sit in judgment of somebody else. I mean, that's the problem. I mean, as if. I mean, God, I mean, this is almost a religious cliche, isn't it? You know, judge not, lest ye also be judged. I simply
admit that Hitler did kill an excessive amount of Jews, right? We can make that judgment.
No, sure. But I mean, I just don't know what. That's what I'm saying is, if you're asking me about making fine distinctions, categorizing people, stacking them up in certain ways, even if you could do it, it would require information to which we, the judges, do not have access. We don't know the situation that any other individual faces, the experience that they're having facing that situation, the reasons they do for what they do. Yeah, certainly we can judge certain actions as good or bad, good or evil,
So you're
Indeed, we
looking
must.
at individual action rather than putting it into a formula to judge the person in and of
Yeah,
themselves.
I mean, well, we could say that, I mean, we can put things into formulas like that. We could say based on what we know, but we don't know much. So we could say, well, based on what we know about Hitler versus based on what we know about MLK, and here are my criteria, and here are my quantifications and my metrics. I mean, you could do that. I just don't know that it helps very much, because what we know and what we're responsible for when it comes to morality and being moral is our own behavior. And I think whether or not we do that kind of moral arithmetic, we all have a conscience that outputs the moral contents or moral values of our actions, or that we're performing, have performed, or are contemplating performing. And whatever our calculus is, however we look at figures in history, celebrities, or whatever, the violating of our conscience can never be right. And failing to do something that our conscience requires us to do also is, let us say, not right. Indeed, that must be the case, because the only way we can even respond morally to other people is by using the outputs of our conscience as our basic data, right? As our primitives, if you like, our moral intuitions, and so on and so forth. So, you know, it's just, I guess what I'm kind of circling around here is that we must be primarily concerned with our own integrity. And then we must, because of that, or alongside that, be morally humble to be moral at all. I would say that's where I stand on that. I don't think.
What do you think about the statues?
What do you mean?
The whole controversy of statues
Being taken down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or destroyed or vandalized.
Okay, so this is a phenomenon going on in the UK. Colston coming down in Bristol. Colston's statue is in Bristol because his money built the entire city. Almost. He was a slave trader. People were upset about that. Obviously, you've got a similar thing going on here with people that for, let's say, for the Confederacy. There are the Rhodes statue in Oriel College, Oxford. People wanted to take that down because, well, for various related reasons. The reason that Rhodes' statue is an Oriel is because he's the one who funded the college. He also funded scholarships for people of color, massively advancing their opportunities collectively in education. And yet the reason people want to take his statue down is because of his not, let us say, reaching standards of anti-racism that we deem acceptable today. There is a reason why Rhodes' statue is in that place. It's not, you know, let's say it's the place that would not exist without him. Similarly, Colston in Bristol. Now, when it comes to the Confederate statues, I have actually written an article about this a few years ago. I wrote this. It's called something like 150 years on how that flag comes down, referring to the stars and bars. And I made an argument that was very much, I would say, rooted in my own culture as a Brit. I'm an American now, but I'm a British-born American, where we remember history in its good and its bad. We name streets, we have statues up of people because they were important, because they mattered in our history, not because we think they're better than anyone else or we want their values to be prominent in today's society. That strikes me as healthy. It strikes me as I guess it's part of the truth thing, that we face and assimilate our history, that we don't expect people of yesteryear to be exemplars of values that we should hold ourselves to. So what that means to me is, if a culture comes to a point, if a society comes to a point whereby non-rights violating processes, i.e. processes that respect the institutions and, well, I'm repeating the word, sorry about this, but respect the processes on which, or because of which, we can better manifest our values, we can improve our values. If we want to remove statues through those processes, then fine. But what isn't fine is for somebody to get upset because of their interpretation of what a statue means. A statue doesn't say anything, right? I mean, you can walk past a statue and believe different things about it and believe different things as a result of its being there. So, you know, one person's or one group's response doesn't strike me as a good enough reason to basically use violence and to impinge on important rights like property rights. I do think that cultures should, in appreciating that symbols are nevertheless important, be able to vote, whatever, again, their democratic and legal means are, to remove statues. I wouldn't, you know, I'm not here making a case for having a statue of Hitler in Berlin. You know, and I don't think the Germans should not decide to not have a statue of Hitler because he was historically important, right? Of course not. Of course they shouldn't have one if they don't want one. Similarly with, you know, statues of Robert Lee down south. But let it go through the processes that are part of what makes society work and evolve in a direction maybe away from the worst behaviors and values of the past.
How do you feel about Columbus? Should Columbus Day be a thing?
I think that's up to America. I mean, I think it's, I mean, should it? That's up to America, and it's up to what America tells itself about itself and its founding. All these nations have a founding myth. Would I support commemorating part of a founding myth that is false? No. I like truth, as I was saying earlier.
Do you know the story of that? I think it was a children's book. I'm not sure, but I think there was a children's book about Columbus that got very popular, and people just ended up believing what that book said. It just became the main source of.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think, you know, I'm with Jordan Peterson and Logos, right? When you know something to be false, say it, especially if somebody asks you, especially if you're in the room, and by not saying it, you're going to be deceiving. You know, you know, I'm not a historian. I'm not a historian of 1492 or whatever. So, you know, it's complicated, right? I mean, weren't the Chinese here first? I mean, you know, I think as long as one knows why one is doing what one does, and one is prepared to examine that, you know, doesn't just go, I don't want to hear, Columbus, right? As long as that's not your, I mean, I'm being silly, of course, but a lot of politics is that. A lot of cultural, I don't know, a lot of these cultural wars kind of continue because of that attitude. And that's dishonest. That's intellectually dishonest, which I will never support.
To bring it back to cartoons, there's an episode of South Park which we need to watch on this show. Have you ever seen South Park?
I have.
We need to discuss that show on this show.
It's a phenomenal show.
Phenomenal show. There's an episode where Randy, I'm surprised you've seen South Park.
I think it's the only American cartoon that I have seen to any extent.
Where Randy is very, very anti-Columbus Day to the point of very hardcore. Do you remember this episode?
I haven't seen this episode, so I'm interested.
Very hardcore social justice warrior. Get rid of Columbus Day, and beating people up who, I don't remember what exactly he did, to be honest, but my South Park mind is just imagining absurd things it was absurd what he did in the name of Columbus being bad. And then later in the episode, you find out the reason why he is like that is because he dressed up as Columbus for Halloween 10 years ago. And he was ashamed of himself. And
Right.
when the picture came out, he got very defensive. I didn't know what I was
Right.
doing then. I didn't know. And I feel like part of the hatred towards these people is kind of because as children, we kind of are taught to look up to people like very highly. That I at least in American culture, we're just taught like George Washington and Christopher Columbus. These are just like are Superman to us.
This is interesting because one of the first things I observed moving from the UK to the US about the US, and it's one of the biggest differences between American culture and British, in my opinion, is that Americans are much more deferential and respectful of authority than the Brits. The Brits tend to laugh at people in power. They tend to have a
That's
natural...
how I've always felt, even as a child. I was like, why?
Yeah. Well, yeah.
This
But Americans, they like their heroes. Americans love heroes. They love celebrities. But they actually look up to them. It's as a natural disposition, as a default, which is kind of interesting in a country that prides itself on rugged individualism and, you know, it's kind of libertarianish. It's the opposite is true. Americans love to respect authority. You couldn't really explain the massive support for the outrage that was the Second Gulf War without that. The rest of the world just looked, you know, with a boggled mind on it, the US. I mean, I'm crassly generalizing, but you know, I definitely feel that. The Brits have this attitude that, oh, that guy wants to be in power, like he actually chose that. There's something wrong with him. Don't trust him. The opposite is true in America. It's like, oh, he's important. We want to be around that. Like we want to be around Hollywood celebrity almost. It's like, you know, they like how it feels, Americans. That's the impression I get, again, crassly generalizing, as an American Brit. So I have a foot in both cultures.
Is there any, what's the word, worship of any type of figure in the UK, such as sports figures or accountants or any random group of people? Is there anyone that the UK...
You know, I don't really... I might be wrong. I would be prepared to be persuaded that what I'm about to say is incorrect. But off the top of my head, I would say no. I don't think Brits go in for worship in the way that Americans do.
I think that this exists so strongly in America is because we have a lot of immigrants and we have a lot of disproportionately poor people that are told by our culture that anything you want to do, you can do if you just work hard enough and believe hard enough and make it to the top. And as a result of that, we look at anyone who has made it as someone who they did it. They worked hard. And we applaud that, because if we don't applaud that, then what does that mean about our own personal dreams? Bo Burnham, who is a comedian who I have showed you before, I don't know if you remember him. He has a quote on, I think it's on Letterman or something, and they ask him like a very American question, by the way, what is asked to other comedians that like want to make it where you are, that want to do what you do. What advice do you have to give to them? And he says, my advice would be to not follow the advice of someone who got very lucky, because me telling you to go follow your dreams and go do it and work hard is like a lottery winner telling you, yeah, liquidize your assets, sell your house, go buy lottery tickets. And I think that's just ingrained in us. We have to respect those people because they did it. They made it. But that was just like off. I haven't really thought about it that much. That like just came to my head as I was thinking.
No, I think that's very pertinent, and I think you're definitely onto something. And actually, what you're saying is what something I actually like about the United States. I'm kind of flipping here. One of the things that drew me to the US, that made me decide to want to become an immigrant, is because success is celebrated. And that has positive effects. I mean, I think any small success I've had, I would not have had in the UK. And that is in part because of the American attitude, not only to being successful, but to going for it, right? Like, just try it. Yeah, okay. Like, what have you got? Show us your wares. What have you done? That didn't work. No problem. Try again. And essentially that success orientation is essentially related perhaps to an American optimism. Americans are the greatest optimists, and that has effect, has cultural effect. It's one of the reasons why America is still the most powerful, economically powerful nation in the world. Americans believe in themselves. That is important. That is not just pie in the sky. Believing in oneself does, in fact, affect the trajectory of one's life, even though Burnham's right. It's all luck, but you make your luck. It's all luck, but you can kind of make your luck. And in as much as you make your luck,
if you keep going for something, if you keep rolling the die, you're eventually going to get some luck.
Right. Yeah, and Americans aren't ashamed of success. Brits are ashamed of success often, right? Like it would be considered rude, or it would get noticed if I were to mention without being asked what university I went to in the UK. But I mean, it would be crazy to avoid mentioning it in the US.
Yeah,
like people think, but I do avoid mentioning it actually because I'm British. Although I've just mentioned it now, not by name.
I forgot the master's degrees that Robin has, by the way. I'm terribly sorry. They are from, is it Oxford?
No, I've never heard of Oxford, but I went to Cambridge. But
Cambridge. I just did
you did the horrific thing. Yes, it's like me. Yeah, I don't know. It's like me calling you a Canadian. No, it's worse. Although to be fair, I'll be teaching in Oxford in a few weeks. So
don't.
It's a wonderful place.
Cambridge.
It's a wonderful but that, yeah. I mean, it sounds crazy, but I wouldn't mention it in England. It would have to fit so naturally into a particular context. Otherwise, it's not quite nice. It's not quite nice to show that you have success, to show that
because they view it as luck. Do you think, or privilege?
No, I don't. No, I actually don't think it's either of those things. This might be fanciful, but it might be something to do with the fact that we, as a culture, basically succeeded as much as any. We ruled the world, right? And then we lost it all, and everything is still fine. So we're not really, we're not under any illusions about success coming and going. We also have a quite a well-developed, I'm not saying superior, but certainly well-developed sense of politesse, of manners. This is part of, British politeness. It might also be to do with the collapse of the class system and the fact that, we in times gone by, the British very consciously had a class system. And then we very consciously lost it or eliminated it. Some people would say, British still classist society. Sure. But we've been through a history on this stuff that makes us deeply skeptical, I think, as a culture. I think we're the most cynical of the Anglophone countries. And maybe that is something to do with being the originating one, But that would be an interesting discussion for a whole show. I'm aware of how long we've been speaking.
So, I lost my train of thought. United Kingdom. Oh. Do you know who Michael Bisping is?
No.
I believe Michael Bisping is from the United Kingdom.
Okay.
He is a MMA fighter. If you didn't know, I've been very into martial arts since I was very young, partially because my dad was a black belt in Taekwondo, and then he kind of took that to really enjoying martial arts and studying it and going beyond it, and so I did too. So I'm very into martial arts. Michael Bisping is a martial artist. He is very very well known martial artist. Do you know who Anderson Silva is?
Nope.
Hoist Gracie.
Nope.
Huh. I think those are probably the two most popular. Those are the Michael Jackson of, or the Beatles of martial arts. That's surprising to me. Is there Bruce Lee?
Heard of him?
Okay, so you do know Bruce Lee.
I got a family history with Bruce Lee.
Oh, really?
For another day.
For another episode. So, yeah. Wayne Rooney. Is he
Heard of
from
him.
England?
He's a footballer, isn't he?
Yeah. You know Wayne Rooney.
I mean, I wouldn't be able to pick him out of a lineup, but I
Really?
heard the name.
You've heard the name, Wayne Rooney. In martial arts in particular, and sports, people root for their country. That's like a big thing, rooting for their country, especially in Brazil.
Everywhere.
So that whole rooting for your country thing, do you think Brits like root for their country in the Olympics?
Oh, yeah. All countries do that.
Does the UK win a lot of medals in the Olympics?
I would say it punches above its weight. I think we were second in the medal tally in the whole world was it 2012 when the Brits hosted the Olympics? Which was astonishing. Although that was interesting because I think the entire country just fell over in shock. Like the Brits really didn't think that they could get it together to host it. They didn't think that they would be very good at it at the sports side. Like the thing about the Brits is we actually know that we're not very good at things. And then occasionally we surprise ourselves and then we go back to knowing that we're not very good at things. And most of our self-talk is self-deprecating. It's a very self-deprecating culture.
I see that a lot in
thinks.
your TV shows.
Yeah.
Michael
it's for the opposite of the US because the US doesn't do that. They're self-aggrandizing.
Michael Bisping, by the way, he was in a press conference with Luke Rockhold. I don't expect you to know what these names mean, but the other fighter, Luke Rockhold, was answering a press conference question, and he was they were like, how are you so sure you're going to win? And he was basically just like, I got my mindset right. I'm believing in myself. I go into the gym every day, and I know I'm going to beat this guy. And I think to myself, I'm going to knock him out. I got this. I dream about it. I'm just willing myself to victory. And Michael Bisping responds like, yeah. Believe, achieve, bullshit. I'm just going to go into this ring and punch this guy in the face. And now that you're mentioning the British attitude towards things, that makes a lot of sense because he doesn't care about. That's
a great example.
Willing himself to achieve or working hard or any of that, and that makes that quote in context seem a lot more British.
It's a great example. Yeah, that feels right to me.
Okay, so how much time do we have left on this recording?
I don't know, but I think we should bring it to a close.
Okay, so commenters, tell us what you think about hiding information about someone who did something bad, such as in Robin's case, Jimmy Savile?
Yep.
Jimmy Savile or George Washington, Robert E. Lee. Next episode, we're going to put in, if any, the top comments of this response, whether it be realistic, a good answer, satirical, just if it gives me a chuckle, if I look at it and I go, interesting. Robin and I will pick the best comments and we'll air them on the
Yeah, let's discuss them. Yeah, that's right. Let's engage them directly.
on the beginning of the next episode. Tell us, should Robert E. Lee statue be destroyed? Should we hide information about the likes of Martin Luther King Jr. or Mr. Jellybean King for the benefit of society looking up for them? And we will see you on the next episode of No Occasion to Shout.